In the eyes of some of its biggest fans, The Sims 4 has suffered hundreds of blows to its reputation. I mean, look at the poor thing. It's being destroyed bit by bit. What led to this? Is there a failure of leadership at EA, or are things going just fine on their end? This is just a visualization, and I don't think that EA are actually demons. Of course not. Join me, fellow Sims castaways, as we explore our little island and why the ship that sailed away probably isn't coming back. This tale starts with SimCity because it was under development at the same time as The Sims 4 and released about a year ahead of the new Sims title. There was a huge backlash due to the online requirement, given SimCity is generally viewed as a single-player game. And to make matters worse, the servers on this online-only game couldn't handle players at launch. SimCity released to weak sales, which put Maxis in a precarious position. Shortly before The Sims 4's launch, players knew that Create a Style, a popular feature from Sims 3 that let players customize objects, would not be coming to the new game. This fact actually made it onto The Sims 4's Wikipedia page under controversies. Because of an interview, we also knew there wouldn't be story progression, grocery stores, schools, or work locations. So basically, everywhere but your house was make-believe, and not even a rabbit hole. At least you can see rabbit holes. They're make-believe on the inside, but not on the outside. In September 2014, The Sims 4 launched to a very, lukewarm reception. It was review bombed with 1 star by many players that felt it was far too buggy and hollow to begin to replace Sims 2 or 3. Usually a franchise moves forward. Sims always dropped things that were added in expansions when moving to a new base game, but tended to advance the series both technologically and in terms of gameplay. While I was working on the first coverage for the new guide, my 5-year-old community was losing veteran members. Anyone I talked to who left said the game was missing far too much and far too simple. And they were right. The game launched missing a lot. There was no family tree, so your sim would have to think carefully when dating. Never know who might be your cousin. Basements, pools, toddlers, and ghosts were entirely absent. Players who bought Sims 4 found a much smaller game world. It went from dozens of lots in an open layout that encouraged exploration to a tiny, sad 6 or 7 lots per neighborhood, and only a handful of those to choose from. We only had Willow Creek and Oasis Springs. Of course, some players felt the game was smoother, but it was hiding things under the hood, a void of nothingness. If there's no world to explore and hardly anything complex to the game itself, of course it performs better. The Sims 4's major upside over its predecessor came with its own massive downside, and that's not a great position to be in. Of course, the game has a solid build mode now, and the Create a Sim tools were good even then. But those are the environment and character creation phases of a game, not the game itself. Kevin Van Ord wrote on GameSpot that Sims 4's biggest problem is that The Sims 3 exists. So you could not take this many steps backward and still somehow feel like 4 was an upgrade. All in all, based on missing features and unfinished coding that meant the game was a mess to play, it was clear the game was released with EA's share price in mind more than creating a satisfying product. It needed to be delayed, but I suppose the SimCity thing made EA afraid of taking risks. The money flow from Sims 3 was stopping due to the release of the final pack, which was Into the Future, and those pack sales would inevitably drop off. Developers did acknowledge the game had problems and said they had to make sacrifices due to new technologies like the emotion system and more advanced behaviors. Those smarter Sims. But there was just so much missing for this excuse. It wasn't ready at all, bottom line. There were just 2 tiny worlds, boring gameplay, buggy gameplay,
lack of story progression, dishwashers, burglars, firemen, repairmen, repo men, nannies, half-walls, graveyards, bikes, paid time off for jobs, creative style, pools, basements, rabbit holes for work, and toddlers. What am I missing?
Oh yeah, cars in a game people can play. So that's the state Sims 4 was in at launch, and it's crazy to look back and list it all out. The Sims 4 was, thank God, moddable, and a modder named Twisted Mexi actually was the first to publish extended cheats for the game. That's right, among all the other problems, we barely had any cheats, and he found a ton that made the game more enjoyable. But while digging around in Sims 4's code a couple years later, he found reference to the online game Sims 4 was going to be. This is relevant as before Sims 4 was released, a Maxis employee leaked details on a blog about Project Olympus, the Maxis codename for a game that was to become an online Sims game. Remember that thing with SimCity? This is all happening right around the SimCity fiasco with its online-only requirement and heavy hate from the player base. So online-only games were a no-no right now at that point in time, especially for single-player games. All in all, the theory is that EA scrapped the online game and used systems from it for Sims 4. They didn't have enough time for development. They marketed the things that were best developed, like Create a Sim, and worked hard to get something out the door by September 2nd for release day. Reusing things from other game prototypes is a typical practice in the video gaming industry, so it's relevant to Sims 4 development, but not necessarily something they did wrong. It just explains a few things. So we're less than a month after a fairly crappy release. You know what the first thing the Sims team patched into the game was? A gnome. With all that missing, they added a gnome. Thankfully, a few weeks after The Sims 4's release, they patched ghosts into the game and added ambrosia and death flowers. In November, they finally added a pull tool. It was clear they were working frantically to get things that were missing back into the game in order to please players, because it had already been released prematurely to please shareholders. It took 5 months in total to get ghosts, pools, and family trees. Meanwhile, they were working on the game's first 2 major packs. The first pack to release for The Sims 4 was Outdoor Retreat, which added the first vacation to the game. This was a game pack, not an expansion. Sims 4 ditched the Sims 3 store, but added a third type of pack that was meant to have a narrow focus on one gameplay idea. In this case, camping and a wilderness destination. Outdoor Retreat featured an aspiration, new reward traits, and it really wasn't all that bad in itself. But the timing was awful. The game was in a bad state, and adding vacations was not going to fix any of the complaints the players had. The bad SimCity launch had taken its toll by this point, and in March 2015, Maxis Emeryville, the studio that had created many of the games we loved from Maxis, was closed and consolidated into Maxis' Redwood Shore studio. Emeryville was not the Sims studio, but you can see restructuring within EA to fix its profit margins after some disastrous launches. Jason Schreier reported that EA was not very happy with both the Sims 4 and SimCity sales. They deserved poor sales. It was 2 months after this before the game had basements. I mean, good God, man! It's March 2015 and Get to Work is Sims 4's first expansion, and it was actually pretty good. It didn't relieve the base game's massive problems, but I did enjoy all 3 active careers and retail. It's not saying much, but other than gardening, it was pretty much the best thing we had to do at the time. Something about Get to Work is it probably has the most animations of any pack we've had. This points to one of several reasons about why Sims 4 is so weak. The development team is all spread out. If we get good animations in one pack, we probably won't get a world. If this one has decent gameplay they took time to code, the next one will fall flat because they're always working on like 3 to 4 projects or more at one time. So Get to Work wasn't awful, but it set a bad precedent. It came with no traits or aspirations, and the game sorely needed them. Imagine playing with only base game traits, and this was one of the major gameplay issues. Sims feeling all exactly the same, giving you little reason to play a different one. They skipped the basic step, and it would quickly become a noticeable pattern that you aren't even guaranteed these side attractions and new expansions. Expansions, the ones that cost almost as much as a AAA game. This pack brought hot tubs to the game, if you gave EA $10. Instead of give us what had traditionally been a base game object, they decided to sell it to us in Perfect Patio. Why do I view hot tubs as a base game object? Primarily because it's something you can throw in the base game that wealthy Sims can purchase, giving you something to do with all that money. They would eventually give everyone a bad hot tub on last year's Sims 20th anniversary. That was the only gift to the community for that anniversary, and many of us already owned one. September 2015 was the 1-year anniversary for The Sims 4, and Max has shared some cool stats from that first year. Players had woohooed 235 million times and created 92 million Sims. Imagine how many players it must take to do that. This is one of those things that frustrates you, knowing this is a very big game, yet it's created like it has a shoestring budget. The Sims 4 Get Together actually got delayed because it wasn't done. And you know what? I commend that. And I cannot believe they made over 40 packs and haven't had to do this more than once. You see, it's likely that not delaying hasn't cost them much, for reasons we'll discuss a bit later. But it's amazing this is the only time it's happened, at least that I can remember. The big things Get Together added were clubs and the town of Windenburg, putting the game at a total 5 locations right at this time, if you count Magnolia Promenade, which you shouldn't. Just to give you a frame of reference, since I'm only talking about major things, from the beginning to end of 2015, in that 1 year, The Sims 4 had released 2 expansions packs, 2 game packs, and 4 stuff packs. Buying them plus the still full price base game would have set you back $220. The game didn't even have freaking nannies yet for $220. However, to their credit, they did help the base game a bit. Newcrest was added in the middle of this year and would provide builders some nice empty lots to build on, something that was sorely missing for the first 8 or 9 months. Repairmen, dishwashers, and half-walls were other additions in this year. The Sims 4 Dine Out released on June 7, 2016. The idea and contents of this pack are not horrible, but it was buggy, like everything else, and doesn't synergize with the base game at all. You see, you're reliant on the base game to not be a steaming pile in order for the pack to be fun. It's frustrating to be running a restaurant and have Sims doing stupid things that make no sense when you just want them to act like people, not tweakers. I'd be okay with the occasional crazy in my restaurant end game, but in Sims World, everyone's a psychopath. You do not hug over a dining table, and you don't clean up tables as a customer. A big gripe about Dine Out is it's really just them selling us the retail system a second time. And they failed to let the player play the chef or any of the other positions, so you're just stuck managing the restaurant, something that certainly could have made its way into the Get to Work pack that would have made it a must-have. Another thing added in this month of 2016 was the gender customization options you can use for Sims, where you're able to make a male who can get pregnant or choose whether a Sim prefers male or female clothing. This allows players to make just about any type of Sim they want or represent themselves if they are trans. It's fair to say they had made a good bit of improvements up to this point, at least in terms of entirely missing functions. City Living helped and added a new location and a very desirable feature in living in apartments. However, customization was really limited. They also gave the base game a selection of lot traits that could be used to boost lots. My biggest gripe with these was that they required no gameplay to access. You just toss them on a lot. Many of the additions made to Sims 4 up to this point have simply been things that players felt should have been base game objects. And when I list all the common things that were typically in the base games of previous titles, you may understand. I mean, be rationals. Do you really think basements, ghosts, and pools would be an expansion feature? So we weren't really being given things up to this point. They're still fixing the base game and adding things into it that probably should have existed at launch. I don't view them as gifts. I view them as an attempt to make things right on that one purchase. January 2017 was probably The Sims 4's best month ever. It brought back a lot of angry players to try again. If you were an already established content creator, this month probably helped set some records. They released Toddlers, which generated a lot of press and got people to give the game another try. Vampires was released later in the same month. At this point in time, my cheese was still on my cracker, and I wasn't as upset as I could have been. I was drifting away from the game a bit because of its simplicity. But I didn't really get angry yet. The first major blow to my morale would come that November. Cats and Dogs was a disappointment and represents the ultimate example of my theory about how they could never have all the pieces in place. If you get a nice world, you won't get as many assets, gameplay or otherwise. Brindleton Bay was okay, sick animals all over the place aside, but Cats and Dogs felt so hollow compared to the Sims 3 pets. I found basically nothing to do in that pack, and it seriously got me to almost disengage with The Sims. Not only had they trimmed several animals down to just cats and dogs, you basically got the world, the cats and dogs, and nothing else. So it didn't advance gameplay in any way, and my theory is that this is because of Create a Pet and the many assets that went into it. Basically, that took up the pack's entire budget, and they couldn't even be bothered to put in some unique careers. They retooled Doctor Career into Veterinarian and called it a day. While I didn't get excited for it at the time, Laundry Day was a community-voted stuff pack, and people definitely enjoyed it. It goes to show how players want a simulation of actual life and some of the struggles, like keeping your house clean while juggling a career and feeding the kids. Because of Cats and Dogs, I was disengaged in March 2018 and not really paying attention to The Sims. I did catch wind of the My First Pet fiasco. It was such an uproar, a stuff pack that required an expansion pack. It really annoyed everyone, and I would say I'd hope they wouldn't do it again, but they just did kits, and that's pretty much worse. By mid-2018, I'd noticed a big shift in quality of the content coming out. Things were kind of shallow all along, but My First Pet was so greedy and Cats and Dogs was so shallow that it took the game to new lows. More and more obvious bugs were slipping by. There was also a slowdown here. In the first couple years, there were like 8 and 7 packs, but now more like 6 and 5 in 2019. It seemed they had less people working on Sims 4 in general and put people on another project. It most certainly was not some consolidation of developers that would lead to some quality increase. One of the Sims producers left to work on another project, and it's clear it was a big one, as it's all hush-hush. The launch of Seasons satisfied one more of the big wants the community asked for. I personally think weather should not be an expansion thing, but sort of get why it is. However, along with Seasons, they improved gardening and messed with one of the best skills in the game. They did some things that were improvements, like letting you sell things quickly, but made it so that you do not really have to work on your garden. They also put in seed packets that removed the need to explore to get even the rarest plants like death flowers. At this point in time, I'm convinced they do not want people to actually play the game. I can't do a timeline like this without at least mentioning my channel because July 2nd of 2018 is its birthday. I did a video on careers and I was really nervous. I started it because I hated how my focus was going so far from Sims. While the game wasn't enthusing me as much anymore, I had always enjoyed the community. I was pretty shy back then about sharing my opinions, but I enjoyed covering Sims 4 in a new format. Something else worth noting is that by now, a lot of the bare minimum stuff was put back in the game. It took nearly 3 years. Get Famous launched at the end of 2018, and I think the tone was very different at that time. I mean, 26 packs had been launched at this point, so people had some of the things they asked for, even if it was imperfect. Some castaways were angry still, but the community at large seemed much more positive than now. It's not saying a lot, it just wasn't so bitter. From the beginning and throughout 2018, the Sims team have rarely released new traits with packs. It's been very obvious they were no longer interested in expanding Sims to have more interesting qualities and quirks. When they do add aspirations, they're very weak and take next to no effort to complete. It's a pattern I had definitely noticed by now, and it was getting to me. Players complain frequently that Sims do not feel unique, and this with the emotion system is a big reason why. If my first pet and cats and dogs got to me, island living was my actual last straw. I've grown a bit more bitter now, but this one was so lackluster as far as things to do that I actually came out of my shell and released a review of the pack that was pretty negative. I got very sick of getting excited by a feature like the island cleanup and mermaids to find they were woefully inadequate. They gave you a fruit to eat to be a mermaid and bam, you're a mermaid. Whoa. They only have like 6 powers and there's no progression whatsoever. It's all handed to you. Again, no real desire to let players overcome challenges. Realm of Magic was another bitter blow. It was possible to max out Caster in only about 1 hour of gameplay. We're buying a pack and being done with it within 24 hours at this point, which is absolutely infuriating. In addition to that, spellcasters' actual spells were very bland. A lot of them just feel like cheats, to be honest. Discover University gave us student loans, but the tuition cost to attend university was so laughably low that you'd never see the repo man they also put in to come take your stuff if you didn't pay up. In January 2020, a survey came out that made me and a lot of other people kind of excited. They asked us about which packs we'd like to see receive extra polish. The answer is all of them, but of course we were asked to prioritize. This survey also hinted at a winter destination, and we got to pick the activities we'd like to see there. I have to admit that in retrospect, any hope I had was false. Eco Lifestyle came out in June 2020 and was the pack that seemed to trigger the community at large the most up to this point. Mostly because it just seemed boring and weird. It was also extremely buggy, with a new system that lets you influence the ecological standing of a neighborhood. My friends would drift right back to neutral every time she managed to turn it green. But yet again, they did things that are nonsensical. You can generate power by purchasing windmills and solar panels, but they made them super cheap. So you place these on your lot for a few thousand and you've increased the neighborhood's rating to green without really doing anything at all. This also featured the neighborhood action plan system, and it was so untested that players found nearly every action plan was active at any given time, so Sims would be stealing from you and woohooing in dumpsters. What was good about this month was they actually reintroduced firefighters to the game and finally fixed their awful mess of an inventory system. It took nearly 6 full years to get a proper inventory system that is easy to browse and allows you to sell more than one object at a time. September 2020 was bad. While I know some people enjoy this pack, people were very upset and I even protested it. The Sims 4 Journey to Batu came out in September 2020 and didn't tie in with the game at all. This was the main problem. Packs are always optional, but if you did buy it, and did the very linear Batu stuff, you wouldn't learn any force powers or get anything truly useful to take home with you. So there is very little reason to revisit the content. This is a recurring problem in nearly every single area of Sims 4. A lack of interesting rewards that might make you do different things. The release of Snowy Escape was one of the worst I've covered, up there with cats and dogs. It has a nice location, yes, but it gave you so very little to do as a player. It's mostly watching your sim do a few animations with no end goal in mind. Where it did offer gameplay, such as its new mountain hiking event, it handed victory to you yet again. It was a simple walk up a mountain and done. And that was frustrating given all the stuff you could buy or skills you could raise to prepare for the journey. They rounded out 2020 with the big skin tones update people had been asking about for years. I'm not sure it's even really working correctly yet though. It's to their credit to have worked on the problem, but it's sad it would seem that you'd have to make a lot of noise to get noticed. That's kind of why I made this video. I want people to start talking about gameplay and all this DLC we've bought that needs improving. About that survey we were all excited about. We got it all. Snowy Escape and the lifestyle and sentiment system were that survey. This is part of the reason the next announcement annoys me. We're waiting on good things, but they aren't happening. We're all just growing more cynical. In March 2021, kits were announced. Let me tell you what kits are. It's like EA is having a garage sale. That's right, a garage sale. They have a bunch of stuff laying around they don't use, and if they clean it up a bit and put a $5 price tag on it, it'll sell. Because of course it will. The Bust the Dust kit set me off because it was not play tested at all. I'd be humiliated if I released a product that was that buggy, and I'd apologize profusely and promise to make it right. At this stage, things truly feel slapped together. Players like me have a lot of complaints about the quality of work, the depth of features, and how devoid of any challenge The Sims 4 has become. There are no reasons to pursue collectibles except for a select few, and when you do have a reason, they gave you direct access such as with seed packets and vendor stalls. Even after spending $700, you only have 48 traits and many that need work. Sims are still devoid of personality. Remember this quote? They filled in the missing features but never fixed the gameplay that was the biggest cause of frustration for veterans. The updates rarely fix annoying gameplay features. The game has the least options ever, and many of them, like weather, are very easy to add. To stop weather, I have to disable the entire seasons pack, but there are items in it that I like. Nearly every pack needs some work on its gameplay, but because they don't have enough working on patches, they can't even begin to tackle that and make these packs more entertaining. So why is it that EA has never listened to the people who want to play their game, love their franchise, and why do they not revisit those expansions and the base game? The reason is so many people buy every pack anyway. It's like a golden goose. EA does not need castaways in order to have a successful business. Their stock price is soaring, and The Sims is doing every bit as good as it ever was, even if we know that hundreds of thousands of fans are fed up. Look at the upvote ratio on any of my critical videos and you'll see how I know it's a lot of people. We also did a survey and found that there's this massive chunk that isn't playing lately at all. To the people who criticized my first poll, thank you. You were all right and I made a mistake. The first poll didn't properly include builders, so we made it better. Let me give you an example of why it's so hard to get them to pay attention to our concerns. Star Wars Battlefront 2. The game generates a massive controversy, causing a lot of gamers to get upset. It still sells well and is a financial success in EA's eyes. This happens on tons of franchises like Madden or FIFA. Thing is, there are a lot of people that are not nearly as dedicated to The Sims as we are. They don't follow every bit of news and don't pay attention to what other people think. They follow no sim gurus on Twitter and don't ever really speak up. They might watch a few videos here and there, but they're satisfied with the dollhouse and only really screw around in the game. Their style of play is pretty much different than ours, as is the case with people who use the game to build and make pretty Sims. You can see this majority in Amazon reviews. Every Sims 4 pack listed on Amazon has 4.5 stars. So there's either something shady up there, there's a lot of pleased people, or a little of both. But yeah, don't trust Amazon reviews. The idea that every single pack is 4.5 stars is hilarious. I fully believe a lot of the people who comment on my news videos and others are players exactly like me who played Sims as a time management game slash RPG hybrid and enjoyed seeking rewards, gradually building wealth and playing new unique Sims in different ways. When depth went out, we couldn't make it more than a few hours into a game without growing bored of it. I asked early in this video if it's an upper leadership problem with EA. Yeah, I do believe so. I do think the developers and Maxis are good people and work with the time they're given, but we are still customers purchasing a product, so must keep our perspective. If Maxis had more time or more resources, they would probably love to do a better job. We have no idea who to blame. However, in the eyes of a corporation, leadership is doing fantastically. Unless this destroys the Sims' reputation. EA's stock price is at an all-time high, and their CEO, Andrew Wilson, has done an amazing job from a purely business standpoint. But outside the world of corporations and stocks, us players who are devoted fans of something are the ones that take the hit. Things don't look good for the future to me anymore. Kits were a big blow to my faith that things will improve. I'll stick around though. I still plan to make videos about the franchise and advocate EA to do a better job for their fans. For now, I'm a castaway like many of you, and I don't feel like we've been heard. I actually believe them investing the time and effort to improve Sims 4 would be worthwhile and generate more sales. But whatever they do, they absolutely should reconsider their game design and business practices before making a sequel.